sentient programs. They can move in and out of any software still hardwired to their system. That means that anyone we haven't unplugged is potentially an agent. Morpheus. Welcome to EOS Weekly. EOS is going through a phase transition at the moment where the community is waking up to a new viewpoint on things. One where we're going to have to let go of an old, outdated view of what EOS is and embrace a new one. This is going to include letting go of certain government structures that we attempted to apply to blockchain, but where they didn't quite fit. And it's going to include renewing our commitment to one of the key selling points of any blockchain, its immutability. The first few concrete pieces of evidence that this new vision of EOS is taking hold are these two new governing documents, which are now being reviewed by the community. These documents together represent a major milestone for EOS. In order to best explain how these two documents fit into the bigger picture and why they are so important, we first need to take a step back and look at some of the learning experiences that we've gone through since launch, the mistakes that we've made, and the realizations we've come to in response to those mistakes. So, when EOS governance was initially being designed, you can see how it was modeled after governments, how the original governance team at Block 1 was trying to separate powers out into different branches, similar to how the US government and other democratic republics are structured. The goal with this structure was to put checks and balances in place between these three quote-unquote branches of EOS, so that if any one branch became corrupt, it wouldn't bring down the entire system. The other branches would keep their peers in check. What we didn't realize back then, though, was that when we set it up like this, we had inadvertently undermined DPoS, meaning that we gave too much authority to unelected entities. And this introduced attack vectors and ended up weakening our chain instead of strengthening it. The intention was good, it just didn't quite work out the way we had hoped. What the EOS community has realized since then is that it wasn't the idea of checks and balances that was misguided. We just approached the issue from the wrong angle. If we had simply redrawn our diagram like so, and spread the BPs out into a circle, we could have the best of both worlds. With this new model, checks and balances could be attained while still honoring DPoS. All we needed to do was to bring checks and balances within the BP circle instead of empowering outside unelected entities to do it. Block producers were already making collective decisions through the BP supermajority votes, which requires 15 yes votes out of the active 21. And this exact same voting mechanism could be used to introduce checks and balances among the BPs. For example, to remove a BP who was failing repeatedly to produce blocks. In hindsight, this all seems obvious, but 8 months ago, at the time of launch, it wasn't. At right around the same time that this first realization was dawning on the EOS community, there was a second realization brewing. And this second realization was also related to this same flawed design of checks and balances over here. One of our branches was supposed to help deal with the lost car keys scenario. This car keys scenario was a thought experiment that was used frequently during the pre-launch days of EOS. And it goes something like this. If in the real world you drop your car keys on the sidewalk and someone next to you picks them up, it doesn't mean that this person suddenly owns your car. You should have some form of recourse to get them back. Sounds reasonable when you first hear it, but in practice, in the blockchain world, trying to provide a form of recourse hasn't worked out very well. Here's why. In a network where tokens move around at nearly the speed of light, there's simply no possible way for human beings to react fast enough to make a difference when an account is compromised. Human response time is far too slow, which leads us to the second grand realization that has dawned on the EOS community, which is that the best way to deal with lost keys, as well as the theft scenario, is prevention, not reaction. Instead of recourse, the better solution is to ensure that the car keys never fall out of your pocket in the first place. So the realization here was that at our disposal was a powerful permission system inherent within our own EOS.io software, and smart contracts that could be leveraged to build out all sorts of security tools and buddy system types of tools tools that would turn lost keys and theft into non-issues. It's as if the answer was right under our nose the whole time. We're just scratching the surface of what our blockchain is capable of, and what we can do with smart contracts and EOS.io in general. All of us are still learning, but we know that the capability is there. It's just a matter of time before the preventative tools that we need are built out. These two realizations taken together, of the circular model of BP checks and balances, along with the preventative tools over human reaction, brought about a clear new vision as to where EOS needed to be headed. And this new vision rendered the initial version of checks and balances obsolete. And it also rendered the initial constitution obsolete, because the initial constitution was written with this structure in mind. The EOS User Agreement, the EUA, will likely replace the outdated constitution. Each of these two new governing documents map pretty closely to our two grand realizations that we just described. These two documents are not competing with one another in any way, nor do they conflict with each other in any way. Instead, these two documents complement each other quite nicely. We're going to go over both of these docs now, one at a time, starting with the Reg Producer Contract, and then we'll move on to the EUA document next. But before we do, we should clarify that while these two BPs were the primary authors of these documents, they sought the feedback from many community members. Nothing here was created in a vacuum. These were each community-wide efforts. So, Reg Producer is short for Register Producer. This is the actual Ricardian contract that an account signs when a normal EOS account wants to become a block producer candidate account. In other words, signing this contract is what puts you on the ballot for BP elections. What you're looking at here is the new Reg Producer Contract. It spells out in very simple terms the minimum standards that a block producer must meet, such as number 7 here, providing public API endpoints, or number 9 down here, a very important standard, the ability to produce blocks. That BPs aren't missing blocks when it's their turn, particularly not missing 2 blocks in a row. And number 10, that BPs are applying any urgent security patches. And up here, it clearly states that any BP who fails to meet these standards can be voted out by their fellow BPs via the 2/3+1 supermajority vote. Now, while there might be a lot of things people would like to include in the minimum BP standard, this Reg Producer Contract intentionally does not mention anything that is unenforceable. Things like vote buying, sock puppets, BPs with secondary nodes, and so on. While some of these behaviors might be desirable to eliminate out of the network, the BPs simply don't have a police force, nor do they have an investigative body of any kind at their disposal. Nobody to collect evidence, and there's no court system at EOS to give the accused a fair trial. And so this document keeps it simple and sticks with basic requirements that are verifiable on-chain and can be proven on-chain. Is this block producer successfully producing blocks? Yes? Okay, good. On to the next one. Does this BP have security patches in place? Yes? Okay, good. Now, for the minimum test of being able to produce blocks, BPs in the active 21 are already being regularly tested. Just by doing their basic job, we know who is succeeding and who is failing. But there is a long tail of BPs who rarely, if ever, get into the top 21. So being that we don't test standby BPs today, it's possible some of these BPs are collecting a paycheck without actually having any infrastructure at all. For example, a whale could sign Reg Producer on one of their accounts and vote that account into one of the standby BP positions, a position that earns a portion of the 1% inflation. So the whale would then get a nice return on their investment without ever plugging in a single server. This is why Section 8 of Reg Producer here is arguably the most vital part of this contract at the moment. The idea here is that we will randomly test standbys to ensure they are capable of producing blocks. This new Reg Producer puts the standbys on notice that work is underway to start testing them to see what they've really got under the hood. As we move in this direction of testing standby BPs, a question that is coming up is whether standbys should be able to contribute to what's called finality. Should a standby actually produce blocks when they're being tested? Or should we test them in an artificial way where their block doesn't actually go on-chain? Telos and Steemit both have this standby BP rotation in place. Both rotate standbys in, and the blocks they produce do go on-chain. They do contribute to finality. And so far, neither of these chains have had any issues with this. But there are concerns that standbys contributing to finality could add complexities to IBC. The community is currently reviewing this new Reg Producer Contract, and discussions are underway as to how best to get standby rotation in place. Okay, we're going to move now to the EUA, the EOS User Agreement. As we mentioned earlier, this is what is likely going to replace the current constitution. In layman's terms, what this document does is it brings us back to the basics. With checks and balances already covered from within the BPs, we don't need to mention any extra branches of EOS anymore in any of our governing documents, ever again. The two voting layers within DPoS together become our one true form of decision-making. This isn't to downplay the importance of the referendum system as a signaling mechanism. The referendum system has already proven invaluable in speeding the conversation along and helping us to confirm that the EOS community is on board with this new vision. And so this document strips things down to the absolute essentials and makes the return to DPoS official. We say official because right now we are already using true DPoS. The current governing documents are just confusing people by making it appear as though the external entities outside of the BPs have any real power, when in actuality they really don't. So getting the EUA in place will more accurately align our governing documents with reality. The other thing the EUA does is it takes away the false promise that there will be any form of recourse for those who have lost or stolen tokens. This goes back to the second realization we discussed earlier. The EUA is geared towards prevention over reaction. It acknowledges that tokens gone are gone forever. There is no recourse. But the one important promise that this document does make to the token holders is that the BPs won't mess with your account. This is the token holder's one inalienable right, is not to have your account messed with by the BPs. It is actually important that it calls this out, because this means that EOS token holders won't be subject to mob rule. For example, in the unlikely event that the majority of token holders signaled that they wanted to burn all of Block 1's tokens, or that they wanted to transfer all of Huobi's tokens to our EOS.io savings account, the BPs will not comply with either of these demands, regardless of how popular the idea is. With the EUA, immutability is respected. EOS New York has officially put the EUA up for vote in our referendum system. And an interesting thing to monitor is this new tool by EOS Titan, which brings visibility into who has voted for the EUA and who hasn't. The link to this is in the show notes below, so you can see the current state of this. This is another way to get active in the community. If you're still formulating your own opinion on the new direction that EOS is headed, go into the Telegram chats and ask the BPs why they have or have not voted for the EUA. You can see the voter proxies record on this as well. The stance that leaders of our community have or have not taken on this important milestone document is going to be a defining characteristic going forward. If there are valid arguments to be made against this document, let's hear them. Otherwise, let's put the mistakes of the past behind us by approving this document so that we can start looking ahead towards bigger and better things. That's it for this week's episode. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel if you haven't done so already. We'll help you stay current on EOS as this revolution unfolds. Thanks, and we'll see you next week, right here on EOS Weekly.